Hi everyone, Tundele here, and very many thanks for coming to the Africa History channel. This is the third video in the series on the 1851 Bombardment of Lagos. You can watch the first two episodes in the links in the description. Let's get started. In 1787, 7 years into the reign of Oba Ologun Kutere of Lagos, a key event occurred across the Atlantic in Great Britain. A group of evangelical English Protestants allied with the Quakers. They were united in their shared opposition to slavery and the slave trade. Together, they formed the Committee for the Abolition of Slave Trade, led by the parliamentarian William Wilberforce. 20 years later, in 1807, abolitionist groups held a sizable faction in the British Parliament, and by February of that year, after a 10-hour debate, Parliament agreed to the second reading of the bill to abolish the Atlantic slave trade by an overwhelming 283 to 16 votes on the 23rd of February 1807. This bill received royal assent on the 25th of March, and the act took effect on the 1st of May 1807. This act, along with the establishment of the West African Squadron of the Royal Navy to enforce it, would have significant effects on the domestic politics of many of the coastal kingdoms in West Africa that had become dependent on the slave trade. Lagos was the leading example of these slave trading kingdoms. One of the key drivers of empire building from the mid-1600s into the 1700s along the part of West Africa known then as the Slave Coast was the desire to control the slave trade from the north towards the coast on the one hand, and the actual towns on the coast where the Europeans came to buy slaves on the other hand. From the mid-1600s, the state that controlled this flow from the north towards the coast was the Oyo Empire. Oyo's expansion was towards the west, going through the Egbado corridor, onward via the Dahomey Plateau to the coast. In that period, the biggest town exporting slaves was also allied with Oyo, the state of Alada in present-day Benin Republic. In addition to Alada, Oyo also exported slaves through close-by Wida and, to a lesser extent, Badagry. Oyo did not expand towards Lagos because its power was built on the back of its mighty cavalry, which was effective in the less forested areas to the north, west, and the Dahomey Plateau. The forests of the Egba and the Ijebu stood in the way towards Lagos, as well as the Lagos Lagoon. Hence, it chose the path it could fully control. In addition, Lagos was also not a slave trading port in these days. It was controlled by the Benin, who came via boats through the Niger Delta creeks and set up camp there primarily to trade cloth, as we described in the last episode. In the early 1700s, a new state began to rise on the Dahomey Plateau with a very militaristic culture. This state, the Dahomey, under King Agaja Trudeau, would first conquer Alada in 1724. When one of the claimants to the Alada throne invited him to help support his claim to the throne, Agaja decided that he wanted Alada for himself and took the town, with both claimants losing out. 3 years later, in 1727, Agaja would go on to conquer and occupy Wida as well, effectively controlling the two cities that were Oyo's main outlets to sell slaves at the coast. Oyo would have none of this, and it went on to subjugate Dahomey after a series of devastating, punitive expeditions into the Dahomey heartland. 3 years after Dahomey conquered Wida by 1730, it had become tributary of Oyo. While it managed to hold on to Wida and Alada, Oyo traders continued to trade in its territory under the most favorable of terms. Oyo's primary interest was not as much about controlling the territory politically as it was to have full control of the trade that flowed through the territory. Around this time as well, some of the conquered ruling houses of Alada moved east and established Porto Novo, which became a rival slave trading port against the two the Dahomey controlled. Oyo diverted some of its trade to Porto Novo. Finally, Oyo moved further east to expand the trade that was going through Badagry in the mid-1750s. As we will remember from the previous episode, linked in the description, it was about this time that the then Prince Akinsemoyin of Lagos was in exile in Badagry, where he met the Europeans that had come to engage in the increased trade there, and who he then went on to invite to come and begin the slave trade in Lagos when he finally became king in 1760. Sometime around this time in the 1750s as well, Ga, son of the famous Yamba Yao, was appointed the Bashorun of the Oyo Empire. The office of Bashorun was second only to the Alaafin. The Bashorun was the leader of the Oyo Mesi, the council of 7 who were the heads of the non-royal wards in Oyo-Ile, capital of the Oyo Empire. One of the constitutional checks on the power of the Alaafin was that the people, through the Oyo Mesi, could demand his abdication and ritual suicide. Bashorun Ga would abuse this power and cause the deaths of 4 successive Alaafin. He was eventually killed in 1774 by Alaafin Abiodun, restoring the authority of the Alaafin. But this struggle had weakened Oyo. In that time, while Dahomey could not free itself from the subjugation to Oyo, it used the opportunity to begin to try to force all the trade to flow to its own slave ports, especially Ouidah. Dahomey destroyed Little Popo and Ground Popo in present-day Togo to its west. It also sacked Badagry to its east in 1784 and again in 1790. In addition to these, the king of Dahomey at the time, King Agonglo, tried to force slave traders from the interior to sell to Dahomey at prices he set, prices below the market price, so he could take more profit for himself and his agents. He also attempted to coerce the Europeans to only buy slaves from him and his licensed agents in Ouidah. In Dahomey, the king was the principal slave trader, and only those he licensed could trade on the pain of death. It was around this time that Oba Ologun Kutere took the throne in Lagos in 1780. We will remember that he took the throne as the son of Erelu Kuti from the Akinsemoyin camp after the untimely death of Oba Eletu Kekere, who was from the rival Gabaro side of the dynastic rivalry we discussed in the last episode. Leveraging the contacts Akinsemoyin had and recognizing the direction the wind was blowing due to the monopolistic actions of the Dahomey king, Ologun Kutere presented Lagos as the best alternative for trading slaves instead of through Dahomey-controlled Ouidah. In Lagos, while the Oba had prerogatives of taxation and being the first to trade with the Europeans, anyone who had slaves could trade, and the Oba's volume of trade never exceeded 5% of the total number of slaves in Lagos. He was more focused on taxation. This free market built on the tradition of trade on which Lagos was founded. They had needed to trade for everything instead of conquering to get what they wanted. Meant Lagos soon became the biggest slave trading port in West Africa. The astute Ologun Kutere also reduced taxes and loosened regulations to make Lagos more attractive to merchants. In addition, Lagos had a protection that all other ports did not have from Dahomey aggression. It was an island and could only be approached from water. Dahomey had no serious waterborne military capabilities, and any attempt to land their troops in Lagos would have ended in disaster for them. A third advantage Lagos had was the fact that it was only in Lagos that the lagoon had an outlet directly into the sea. This meant that unlike other slave ports where slaves had to march across the sand to embark on European ships, in Lagos, they could be moved directly from the lagoon to the European ships on swift canoes. Finally, emerging events in the hinterland increased supply of slaves to Lagos from the late 1700s. The weakening of Oyo saw the Egba in the Egba forest declare independence from Oyo in this period, with their leader Lishabi coordinating the massacre of nearly 600 Oyo administrators called Ajele in the 153 Egba townships. The increased autonomy the Egba and the Ijebu had from this period saw them begin to bring slaves directly to Lagos and Badagry, which was a closer port to their towns than the Dahomey ports. An increase in supply of war captives sold as slaves also came a bit later. First, from Uthman Danfodio's jihad in what is today northern Nigeria that broke out in 1804, and then from the final collapse of the Oyo Empire in the early 1800s and the many wars of the Yoruba Civil War we discussed in the Gbanamu War episodes, which I have also linked in the description. All of these meant that by the death of Oba Ologun Kutere in 1803, the slave trade had become the most important economic activity in Lagos. This and the existing dynastic rivalries meant that the impact of the 1807 British Act to abolish the Atlantic slave trade would be significant on the political economy of the kingdom. We explore this and how it led to the bombardment of Lagos in 1851 in the next episode on the Africa History Channel. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe. And if you have not, please buy my books in the links in the description. Thank you very much. See you next time.